Okay, so this talk has some methodological part. To me, this is an important aspect of the talk, and in a sense, I am happy that I was after Erika Hoff last week, because actually I reshaped my talk to be a bit of a follow-up of her talk, at least partially, because I think that the message is maybe informative. So, and now this doesn't go on. Oh no. Okay, so we know that bilingualism is all over the place, that there are in many places, many languages being spoken. So actually bilingualism is not an exception, a rare exception actually. Still now I think that the chapters on bilingualism in books of general books of language acquisition or psycholinguistics tend to be at the end with special populations, with pathologies, bilingualism, and so on. While well, this is not the case. It's all over the place. But I think that there is still this feeling that bilingualism is bad, and particularly is bad for kids, that if you, young kids, that if you speak two languages to young babies, they're going to be confused because learning two languages is difficult. So in this talk, what I'm gonna talk is on three aspects. The first one is on language discrimination, as this is a prerequisite. I mean, to become a bilingual, one has to realize that there are two systems in the environment. The second one, and this is where I reshaped a bit my presentation when after Erika's talk last week, is on the developing of the lexicon. And at the end, I will talk on methodological challenges that I think the field faces. And they are really serious, I think. Okay, so, oh my God. Okay, so very quickly, as I hope that most of you already know, at birth, newborn infants, human infants, can differentiate some languages from language pair, but not all of them. For instance, they have no difficulties differentiating English and French, French and Japanese, Japanese and English, but they cannot differentiate Italian and Spanish, Spanish and Catalan, or English and Dutch. But this is something that it's not human specific, because there are other species, animal species, that they can do the same. And in general, at least for humans, what it has been argued is that humans, they compute something that is called a rhythm, but at the end of the day, it is related to the syllabic complexity that a language allows. It's not the rhythm in terms of music, it is the rhythm in terms of the syllables. And this is what human infants, young newborns, and animals from other species, they can also do. So, as I said, to become a bilingual, the newborn has to be able to differentiate, to realize that there are two things. If I am not able to notice that there are two different systems in the environment, I will just learn one, maybe something a bit confusing, but it would be one. So the first question in terms of development is, how long does it take an infant, in specific cases a bilingual infant, so bilingual to be infant, to realize that there is more than one language in the environment. And there are interestingly, there are very few studies on this topic, and sometimes I feel the feeling that I'm the only one who's concerned, because there are the other two papers that I know, there were groups that produced only one paper. So the first, and with the newborns, is only Janet Werker and Christa Baez-Heinlein, who investigated infants, newborns. And when I say newborns, I mean that they are between 4 hours and 4 days. So while they're still in the hospital. And they choose infants that were exposed prenatally to 2 languages that sound very different, and they belong to different rhythmic classes. So they should be easy to differentiate. And they had babies that were born to English monolingual mothers, and babies that were born to mothers who spoke English and Tagalog regularly during pregnancy. And the range was between 30 and 70% of exposure to the to each of the languages. So they tested the infants on language discrimination and in language preference, and the language discrimination was the usual habituation experiment where they presented sentences in English to one of the groups. The babies, they habituated, and then at the test, the infants, they received sentences in Tagalog, and the sentences were delivered through the pacifier that you see in the picture. So every time the baby was doing a high amplitude suck, a sentence was delivered. And the control group had English before and after the habituation. And what the results show very clearly is that both monolingual and bilingual infants show discrimination. So prenatal exposure to 2 languages that they do not belong to the same rhythmic group does not confuse the infants. So even though the infants, they had been exposed to the 2 languages, the bilingual infants, they could discriminate them. But as I said, English and Tagalog can be distinguished at birth by monolinguals because they have a different rhythms. So the question is what happened with infants that they have been exposed to 2 languages that are not distinguishable at birth, such as Dutch and English or Catalan and Spanish. For those of you who do not know Catalan, and some people say, well, but how different it is from Spanish? The point is, it is as different from Spanish, or I think that is a bit more different from Spanish than Italian is from Spanish. So it's another of these Romance languages, and Spanish and Italian, they sound almost intelligible by native speakers of each language, and more or less the same happens with Catalan and Spanish. So what we did was a habituation familiarization procedure. We tested 4.5-month-old infants. They were habituated to sentences familiarized to sentences in one of the languages. And then at test, they heard sentences in the same language of habituation or in a different language from the habituation. So we have same and switch trials at test. And what we expect is that if infants, they are able to notice the difference, in this case, the sentences are delivered by looking at the screen. And what we expect is that if the infants, they notice the difference, they will look longer when they are listening to sentences that are in the new language, in the language that they have been familiarized previously. Oops. And these are very old results, and we observed that 4.5-month-olds, nobody has problems noticing the difference between Spanish and Eastern Catalan. That is the Catalan spoken in Barcelona. And there were no difference at all between monolingual and bilingual infants. Recently, we have replicated these results, testing the infants with 2 dialects of Catalan, but the only difference then it's in the distribution of vowels of the 2 languages and of the 2 dialects. And again, monolinguals and bilinguals, they are equally good at noticing the difference. And again, Spanish and Western Catalan, that they only differ at the intonational level. Monolinguals and bilinguals at 4 months of age, they have no difficulties noticing the difference. And I must say that this second one is a bit challenging for adults. So, so far so good. So the results, they seem to point in the direction that exposure to two languages does not make bilinguals better or worse than monolinguals, distinguishing the two languages. However, we have some data showing that they are not, the way they do it, it doesn't seem to be exactly the same. So actually, this was the very first paper that we published. And what we did is that in this was quite an atypical procedure in which the babies, they look at the center of the screen, at the focal point. There's a moving image to capture the attention of the infant in the center of the screen. And then either on the right or on the left, there will be sentences at random. It's not that the sentences from one language will appear at one side and the sentences from the other language at the other side. No, this is completely random, but what is measured in this time is the orientation time. How long does it take the baby to look where the sound is coming from? And previous research had shown that with this procedure used with monolingual infants, they orient faster to the maternal language than on a known language. And as you can see, this is the way our monolingual infants, they behave. They oriented faster to the maternal language than to an unknown language, that it was English. And we also tested Italian and we observed the same results. And however, the bilingual infants, they show just the opposite pattern. There were no significant differences for English, so everybody was taking more or less the same amount of time to orient to English, but they were very slow to orient to the maternal language. And because this is quite an atypical result, and I think that when one gets something that is unexpected and atypical, has to repeat the experiment. We replicated the pattern with other languages, with older infants, and we systematically, across experiments and populations, we observed this atypical pattern in bilinguals. We tried any possible explanation that it came to our mind, thinking, oh, maybe this is, because then you have switch trials in the sense that the sentence, the two adjacent sentences, they do not belong to the same language, or there are no switch trials where two adjacent sentences, they belong to the same language because they were at random or quasi at random. But nothing, I mean, apparently nothing predicted this atypical pattern of orientation in bilinguals. And it took a few years, and it's something like 20 years, before at least we could identify a bit what was happening. What we did was we recorded the EEG of infants at this age, and we followed a procedure that Marcela Peña and co-workers had used for infants between 3 and 6 months of age. So we know that the procedure worked at this age. And in this procedure, what we did was we presented 4 sentences in German, which is an unknown language, and it's very different from either Spanish or Catalan, and the native language, that is going to be Catalan or Spanish, depending on the native language or the maternal language of the infant. And the other language was Italian. That is a close language, but it's slightly different. So, and I'm going to focus on this second time window, because what we expected is that in terms of, we might observe differences in the type of entrainment, particularly for the theta range, but maybe also in the gamma range for the infants. And the hypothesis was that at this age, infants, they are very good at processing syllables. And the original explanation that we proposed in the 97 paper was that the bilinguals, they would be doing some kind of more further phonological processing, that they were kind of more engaged in processing the speech signal. So, and the results, they confirm in a sense. I think that the pattern results is a bit complex, but I think that this is a bit what we expected. The monolingual infants, what we observed was that actually there were no significant differences between the native language Italian and German. I think that this is because of lack of power, very frankly. My feeling is that with more infants or with a slightly different procedure, I think that now it was a mistake having 3 conditions, because we could not get lots of data points in each of the conditions. But although it looks as if there is a difference, there is not. So but the trend makes sense. So there is more entrainment to the native language, and it just degrades to us as you move far away. But the one that really yielded significant differences was the bilinguals, and the bilinguals, what they showed is that high power in the theta band for the native language, and clearly the other 2 they were not. So it's kind of the native language gets a lot of processing if we can translate. The problem of interpreting this type of responses in even more at this young age, where there is so little references, so few references, that it's a bit complicated. But I think that at least it shows that at this very early age, something that it has been related to phonological processing, it's different from bilinguals and monolinguals, and that the bilinguals, they seem to be very focused on very, focused is not the right word, seem to be processing in a very efficient way the native language, whether it's an attentional aspect or it's more of a bottom-up aspect. This is something that we cannot tell from these results. So overall, these results, what they're showing is that, well, bilingualism doesn't seem to imply huge changes. Yes, there is some kind of slight ways of processing the linguistic stimuli in a different way, and we wanted to, but this is because actually the bilinguals, they're having experience, and the monolinguals too, with a speech signal. So maybe the bilinguals, they have learned something about the speech signal, and this is why they are showing this higher power for the native language, because to be able to separate the 2 languages, they have been working, processing in a more extensive way. All that is very vague, but I cannot be more specific. So then we got this idea on what if we try why if we compare monolinguals and bilinguals with languages that for sure they have no experience with their codes. And so what we decided is to test babies with stimuli like this. So these are one of the languages, and this is another sentence from that we're exposing our infants. And well, the one is Japanese Sign Language, the other one is British Sign Language. Don't ask me which one is it, because I can't remember now. And for adults, this is just impossible. I mean, we have no idea if they are from the same language or for a different language. And even for speakers of sign language, they need to be very proficient. And if they are not proficient in the languages, it's a challenging. It is really challenging. So what we did is that we used the habituation procedure paradigm, where we habituated infants to these sentences in one of the languages, and then we compare the last 2 habituation sentences with the first 3 test sentences and see whether they were able to discriminate. What we expected, again, was increasing looking times. So what we observed was that at 8 months of age, both monolingual and bilingual infants, it seems to be a piece of cake for them, something that for us is lost. We wanted to see that, because there is this other hypothesis that bilinguals, they keep the discrimination abilities open for a longer period of time, so that they are more plastic for a longer period of time. So what we did was that we tested them, another group of infants at 12 months of age, and in this case, it was just significant. The other one was highly significant, it was just significant, and there were no differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. So if clearly it seems the ability to discriminate seems to be vanishing, but monolinguals and bilinguals, they seem to be losing the capacity to discriminate at the same rate. So, so overall, what in something that is critical to in very early bilingual development, there are no behavioral differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. It's true, they seem to be processing or attending the native language in a different way, the bilinguals and monolinguals, but it doesn't result in a better performance. However, what we're going to see is that when visual information, and I'm going to say articulatory, because when we present only visual information, like with the sign language, there are no differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. And when we present this audiovisual information, that then we see differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. And because for most of us, language is audiovisual. And so this is an experiment that we run in collaboration with Janet Worker and her group many years ago. And for those of you who haven't seen the stimuli, basically they look like this. There is no sound because there is no sound. So this is what the infants they were seeing. They saw 3 different French, English, highly competent bilinguals reciting Le Petit Prince or the Little Prince, and then we habituated infants to one of the languages, and same procedure as the one that I just described for the sign language. And if I am putting one next to the other, this is again extremely difficult for adults. You need to be native speaker or extremely proficient in one of the 2 languages to be just above chance. But again, infants, they at 4 months of age, I'm not reporting the data for 4 months of age because we only tested the monolinguals. They can discriminate at 6 months of age, they can discriminate, and at 8 months of age, only the bilinguals discriminated. The monolinguals, they no longer discriminated at 8 months of age. This is why we choose in our previous experiment the 8 months, because this is where we had seen differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. So the question of why the bilinguals are able to discriminate, what we hypothesized in this first paper was that it was because the bilinguals, they had experience with the 2 languages, so they had been able to learn things about the 2 languages, and this is why they kept on. And because they were French-English bilinguals, this is something that they were used to do in their daily life. So they knew how these movements of the mouth to what sounds they correspond. They had fine-tuned into each of them, and this is why the bilingual, they were able to do it. But no longer the monolinguals, because they had not been doing this exercise of separating this type of stimuli. So then we run another experiment, which is, well, what if we test Spanish Catalan bilingual infants with the very same stimuli? These infants, they have no experience with French and English. They don't know how these very fine movements that they correspond to French or they correspond to English. And we tested 8-month-olds, and poof, again, the bilinguals, they noticed the difference. So, but not the monolinguals. And actually, we were quite surprised to see how similar the results of the 2 populations were. So this is the difference between the test and habituation at the 8-month-olds for the English monolinguals. This is for the English-French bilinguals. So this is, they look less at the test, but the English-French, when there is a change, they look more when there's a change. And here you have the results of the Spanish and Catalan, monolingual and bilingual infants. This is oscillations around 0, and the bilingual, they behave just exactly like the English, French bilinguals. So, and something that explaining why the bilinguals, they may be better at noticing the differences. I think that David Lukowicz had this great idea of linking also where the infants look at different, when they see talking faces. So what he reported was this developmental path where young infants at 4 months of age, they look, this is the difference, the percentage in difference between whether they look more to the eyes or they look more to the mouth. So at 4 months of age, infants, they look more to the eyes than to the mouth. I'm not saying that they don't look at the mouth, but they look 20% more to the eyes than to the mouth. By 8-10 months of age, infants look more to the mouth than to the eyes, and adults will look much more to the eyes than to the mouth. And he linked this with the development of language. And then Ferran Pons with Laura Bosch and David Lukowicz, they had the idea of testing bilingual. So what they did is with a completely new set of data, new set of stimuli. Again, they nicely replicated the pattern for the monolinguals at 4 months of age. The monolinguals, they look more to the eyes than to the mouth. At 8 months, they look more to the mouth than to the eyes. At 12 months, with those type of stimuli, they start to look back to the eyes. The bilinguals, what they did was something different. Sometimes people say they were delayed. Well, no, they were faster at 4 months. They were already at the mouth at 4 months. They look to the mouth at 4 months and not so much to the eyes, but they remain longer in the mouth. I think that describing this as a delay is a bit unfair because this is something completely different. It's not just being delayed, is that they at 4 months, they are already there, and at 12 months, they're even more there, yeah? So that would explain why the bilinguals, why the bilingual infants, they may be able to notice the difference in the movement of the lip because they look more to the mouth. So when they were seeing those faces that I presented you before in the visual language discrimination, probably they are paying attention to the mouth, which is the source of the articulatory information. So, and that fits with what we know, like when adults, we look longer to the mouth than to the eyes. Usually we look to the eyes. It's because it's a noisy environment, non-native speech perception, and this is to compensate for and to get more information about the phonology of the language. And I think that all the results that I have been showing to you so far, more or less point in that direction, that the bilinguals, they develop some kind of compensations that results in higher power in the theta range for the native language, better discriminatory abilities when they see only the mouth or only the talking faces. But with the full information, monolinguals and bilinguals, they get enough information to discriminate. And in another paper that we reported that the bilinguals, they not only look more to the mouth and to the eyes when they have talking faces, but they do it in general. So this is when it goes really outside language. So we presented infants with faces in 2 different experiments, either a baby that's kind of mumbling and then somebody chewing gum, then they were crying and then they were laughing. Of course, in this condition, everybody looks much more to the mouth than the eyes because the eyes are closed and the mouth is big, but clearly the adults, we should be looking to the eyes much more. And This is the results of 9 and 12-month-old infants with the infant faces. And what we see is that in the neutral, in all conditions, the monolinguals, they look more to the eyes and than the bilinguals, or the bilinguals, they look more to the mouth than the monolinguals. So, however, the amount of how much the bilinguals, they will look to the mouth seem to be modulated by the similarity of the two languages. So in this experiment, Birules, Pons, Bosch, and colleagues, they compare 15-month-olds that they were growing up in Barcelona, and that they were bilinguals of Spanish Catalan, or which are a close language or a distant language, that were other languages. It was a variety of languages. And as you can see, when the languages are close, the effect of looking to the mouth is bigger than when the languages are distant. So the idea behind is that when the languages are distant, it is more difficult to separate the two languages. Therefore, the infants, they may be paying more attention to the mouth to get this extra information to keep the two languages separated. So a quick summary is that the language differentiation is a must for bilingual infants. So a priori, what we should observe is that huge differences in these early months in aspects related to language differentiation, but what we have reported, all experiments, they show no behavioral advantages. So when monolinguals can discriminate, the bilinguals, they can discriminate, unless there is, it's only visual information of speech. But there are differences that we have observed in the EEG and the patterns of eye gazing where they are looking at. But, and this is a huge but, is that there are very few studies. So it is difficult to know how much these studies, they replicate across populations, across different procedures, etc. So, and now let's move to my second, that is going to be much faster, it is shorter. And as actually, I'm hoping that most of the audience had the pleasure of listening to Erika Hobbs' presentation last week. What she was presenting was, and I'm going to repeat her presentation, and if those of you who haven't seen it, you can still see it on the recordings that are on the web. And she insisted a lot, and I think that this is critical, that her data came from a very specific population, which was Spanish-English bilinguals in South Florida, that it has very specific, in the sense that English is the dominant language, the Spanish is a heritage language, and it vanishes. What she was saying is that by the third generation, the immigrants, these are Cuban immigrants, they are no longer, the third generation, they no longer speak Spanish. So this is a language I remember that in the old times, we used to say in a diglossic situation where one language socially has no so much value and it has not so many opportunities to be learned and to be practiced. And I remember that in another talk that I heard from Erica, what she was saying is that the parents, when the kids, they were very young, they were talking a lot in Spanish to their kids, but as soon as the kids, they're starting speaking, then they believe that now the children are starting to learn language. Then they started to shift a bit more to English, because English is the language if they want to succeed in life, to get work, to go into college, they need to learn English, which is the language of the country. And she was saying that another feature of her population is that there were simultaneous bilinguals, in the sense that all of them learned the two languages either from birth, because they grew up in a bilingual home, or very early in life, in the first years of life. So, I'm going to talk to you about just the other end, almost the other end of the spectrum. It's also a very specific and completely different population. And I think that this is critical. I think that, and this is going to be my take-home messages, bilingual populations can be very different, are very different, and they can result in very different results. So my population is Spanish Catalan bilinguals in Barcelona. And as Erica did, I want to characterize my population. So the social context, for those of you who know nothing about it, is that Spanish and Catalan are co-official in Catalonia, in Barcelona. Schooling is in both languages. Both languages are spoken everywhere, in any context. No language has a higher social status than the other, and they're typologically related. And as I said before, they are so as close as Spanish and Italian. And because I'm talking about the vocabulary, and I just said that they're typologically related, just to give you a bit of an idea, around more or less, of 2/3 of the words of the CDI are something that we could define as cognates, such as gato, gat, meaning cat, puerta, porta, meaning door, and leche, llet, meaning milk. And around 1/3 of the words are non-cognates, like perro, that is goes, meaning dog, silla, cadira, meaning chair, or queso, formaggio, meaning cheese. And that also, I added this leche, llet, because sometimes it's a bit complicated to define what is a cognate and a non-cognate. And it is something very, 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 very difficult. And when one is studying the bilingual vocabulary, and if one believes that the similarity between the two languages will have some kind of effect, how you're going to measure the similarity is something that is not obvious. So the data that I'm going to show you, this is something that one of the members of the MultiMind, which is Daniela Avila, together with one of my PhD students, one of my PhD students, that is Gonzalo Garcia de Castro. They have been collecting. I'm going to present you data from 143 bilinguals and 163 monolingual, Spanish, Catalan, and the cut point is at 80%, which there are many ways of cutting there. So this is another arbitrary decision. But I think that for the result that I'm going to show you, it doesn't matter. The age of the infants was 10 months to 30 months at the completion of the questionnaire. And they developed a very extensive online parental questionnaire, and they assess, contrary to the CDI that you assess either the comprehension or the production. Here, parents for every word are asked if they think that their children, they understand, they produce, or both. And what I'm going to show you are that the regression line and the confidence interval is the most likely vocabulary size in our data with Bayesian regression with the Poisson distribution. So this is the total vocabulary size from the 10 months to the 36 months. And well, not surprising, the bilinguals, they know more words than the monolinguals. Because when you put the two languages together, this is what happens. Yes. Yet we have some monolinguals that they know lots of words at every age, and they know more words than the average bilingual. And this is true both for perception and production. So the second data that I wanted to show you is what we call the conceptual vocabulary, that is lexicalized concepts. So in this case, is if a child knows goes, dog and perro for, it will count only one. So because it corresponds only to one, let's say, concept. And well, and that's not, here again, we see that the bilinguals, as compared to the monolinguals, they show a bit of an advantage, okay? Something that in other studies, it has not been the case. Usually when one takes this measure, this is when monolinguals and bilinguals, they tend to show the same result. Here there is a slight advantage, and now it's going to be the one that is a bit, okay, so this is vocabulary size in the first language, and this is where the big difference with Erica's results, because this is the type of results that she was showing is the vocabulary size for English, okay? Here is for the dominant language, the one that the parents, they said the infants they were more exposed to. And here we see no differences at all for the dominant language, which, okay, it's fine. They for the dominant language, then what one would expect is that because for the second language, they will know a subset of the words they know for the first language. Oops, and this is when why not? Oh my God. Okay, I have to go back. I don't know what happened. Okay, let's delete this. I don't know what happened. So, and this is when you will get some hints about what's going on. So this is for the non-dominant language. Of course, the bilinguals, they know many words as compare many more words than the monolinguals. But if they were monolingual, they should know no words.
Núria, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're not sharing the screen at the moment.
I'm not showing the screen. Oh, sorry.
No.
Oh, that's very weird. Now?
Now it works.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, now I see it very small. Okay, don't know what's happening.
But we see all PowerPoint with like edition mode. Now we see presentation.
Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. So this is, I think that, so here, of course, the bilinguals, they should know many, many more words than the monolinguals in the second language, because the monolingual, they should know no words. And when you talk to people, first time I realized that I had to ask also the vocabulary in the second language, also for infants who the parents said that they were 95% exposed only to one of the languages and the exposure to the other language was very marginal. We realized that the parents reported that they knew many words in this second language. And I have consulted with colleagues that live in actually it was, for instance, Krista Byers-Heinlein, and she said, yes, we also observe the same. So in societies that they are very multilingual, you may have infants that the parents say that the infants are not exposed to the second language, or the exposure is really, really marginal, and yet when they check the words that the infants, they believe the infants know, they say that they believe the infants know many words. And of course, this goes a bit down, the data of the monolinguals, they go down if we're more stringent with the definition of bilingualism, but you still get that these monolingual infants, they know words in the second language. And this is the last set of data that I want to show you is, well, maybe this is because Catalan and Spanish have so many cognates. So we know from different types of investigation with adults and with toddlers that bilinguals access, there's lexical access is language non-selective. Now, those of you who know more than English, now that I'm speaking, you're accessing all the words that are phonologically compatible with what I'm saying in all the languages that you know. So, but of course, if the words are cognates like gat will activate gat and gato a lot. But goes, the likelihood that the sound goes will activate perro is quite low. So even if you don't know the word and you hear, if you don't know the word gato, but you know the word gat, when seeing this object, you may infer that gato is this animal. But if you know that this is a ghost and then you hear perro, it's a bit difficult to infer that this is a perro. So, and this is part of Gonzalo Garcia de Castro dissertation. And what I want to show you is a very, very preliminary data, very preliminary, but I think that it's worth showing. So these are if we separate the words as cognates and non-cognates, what we see is that for the first language, there are no differences between cognates and non-cognates. The children, they know the same. The proportion is exactly the same. But for the second language, it seems that indeed the cognates, being a cognate of a word in your first language helps learning it. So what we observed is that children know more cognate words in their second language than non-cognate ones, and the effect is replicated in production. We observed exactly the same with the same. He observed that because it's his. These are his results. So the conclusions from the vocabulary is that our results show that when contextual factors and lexical similarity converge, bilinguals are not delayed. And Laura Bosch and Marta Ramon Casas published with a much smaller sample some results, investigating another thing, but the results of our results converge with the results. And lexical similarity seem to help bilingual infants to acquire words in their second language, also preliminary data, because as I said before, the definition of cognateness is a bit contentious. So we still want to determine how much the overlap needs to be. And then I want to go to the methodological challenges. The first one is the ill-defined concept of bilingualism. So to become a bilingual, what is the minimum amount of exposure that you need? I have seen papers claiming that bilinguals were exposed to the non-dominant language 10%. That was the minimum. I have seen papers saying that monolinguals have been exposed to a second language by 20%. So one of the things that I don't know how many of you is aware of this Many Babies Bilingual initiative, but there were all laboratories from many places in the world working together, and there was this kind of agreement that the cutoff was going to be 75%. But this is a bit arbitrary. But I think that it is important to define that when you publish your data, the information has to be there very clearly so that everybody understands the population that you're studying. Then another issue is about the comparability of monolingual and bilingual groups. I think that now we're doing very well at keeping socioeconomic status. But yet, and I think that Erika did an exceptional work last week when she was talking about this, the situation where one language is very dominant and the other one doesn't have any chance to advance, let's say, because at one point the society wants the children to learn English. And so the home language doesn't get the same chances. But then there are other issues with the comparability of bilingual groups. So the language similarity, and as I'm going to show right now, what is language similarity is another problem. Then how are languages learned? What is the crib bilinguals or daycare bilinguals? As I said before, Erika said that her bilinguals were simultaneous bilinguals, and she said either because at home they learn the two languages or very early they learn the second language. We're calling monolinguals to children that they are learning a second language, but with a reduced exposure. So this is critical in the field that we clarify. Then on the language similarity. So we would all agree that Dutch and German, they're very close, and English and Chinese, they are not. But the typological distance needs to be defined also in terms of the goal of the study. For instance, first of all, there are very, very few studies that they have directly compared the typological distance. And we have effects going in any direction. Floche and Golik reported no effects in a semantic priming task when they compared bilinguals of typologically close languages and bilinguals of typologically less close languages. Virules et al., we have seen that they have reported effects in eye and where the infants are looking at. And then, as I was saying, it depends on your research goals. For instance, Liu and Kager, they defined the close languages in their study were Dutch, Spanish, and French, and another close languages were English and Chinese, and these were two groups. And so Dutch, Spanish, and French, they were close, one group. English and Chinese were close, another group. Why? Because they were investigating the perception, the development of the perception of the ba, pa, pa contrast. And Dutch, Spanish, and French place the boundary between ba and pa at the same place, and English and Chinese place the boundary between pa and pa at the same place. So these three languages are close. Sandares Catalaro investigating the perception of vowel contrast, define Spanish and English on rhythmic properties. So I think that all these things needs to be clarified. And I think that we cannot make definite decisions, but at least we should provide as much information as possible in the papers, so that when later we want to read one of these papers, we know what has been done, and we are able to know where we are. And actually similar concerns about all the issues that I am saying has been, oh, I forgot the year of the Kremen and Bias-Handel paper. So then it's about the bilingual delay. Well, the bilingual delay is, it's another mess, I think. For instance, I think that in spite of overall significant reduced exposure, so if we think overall, the bilingual, they get much less exposure. The difference is quite small for the dominant language, and the dominant language is less exposed than the non-dominant language. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I'm saying that they are not as big as one would expect if there were a big delay. And I am plotting here the results of a study that we did some years ago on sensitivity to final word consonant clusters in 10-month-olds, that Spanish and Catalan, they are different in this phonological dimension. And the Catalan monolinguals and the Catalan dominant bilinguals, they were exactly, they show exactly the same effect. The Spanish, this is the Spanish pattern that should be close to 0. And here we have an effect of exposure. So the Spanish Catalan infants, dominant Spanish, they show kind of an intermediate effect. So it is as if they haven't learned very well this distribution. But these guys, in spite of having, I would say at least 20% less exposure to Catalan, they behave like the guys that got 100% exposure to Catalan. So is bilingual language acquisition different? Well, yes, because they need to differentiate and learn to systems, and they have less input in each of the languages. But does it require different learning mechanisms? And I think that they don't. Basically, they don't. And I think that many of the effects that are reported can be explained by general learning processes. And then you just add the frequency, the context. The other day, something that Erica mentioned was that one of the things that was particularly detrimental for Spanish in her Spanish-English bilinguals was that the context where the Spanish words appeared were smaller. If you read the Roy et al. Paper in the PNIS, I think that is the development, the origin of the first word, it has something like the emergence of the first word in a child. Well, this is what they say. So if we have that words used in distinctive spatial, temporal, and linguistic contexts are produced earlier, suggesting that they are easier to learn. So if the bilinguals, they have the same opportunities for the two languages, then we don't observe differences. But if they don't, then we observe differences. But what is true, and there is some yes, is that there seem to be some compensatory mechanisms for the less exposure, like the data I reported on the EEG and on the attention to the mouth. So the other day, Erica finished saying that bilingual language acquisition is difficult. Well, I think that is investigating bilingualism is difficult. First, we lack data with monolingual language acquisition for many of the languages. So if you want to study, for instance, a Hungarian English bilingual, Hungarian has vowel harmony. How is vowel harmony acquired? As far as I know, nobody knows in these very early ages. So then you have to run the experiment for the monolingual Hungarian, then and to be able then to compare the bilingual one. So researchers doing bilingual research sometimes face the challenge that they have to collect the data for the two languages or for just one of the languages with the monolinguals to be able to know what is the monolingual development. Then another question that is over and over here is, do we learn one system, the learn two systems? When do we learn two systems? Well, if you look at the other literature, this is something that it's not clear there. When do they have two phoneme systems? Do they have one phoneme systems? Do they have two separate lexicons? Do they have one? So maybe this is a too challenging question for the infants if we cannot even see in the adults very clear results. Why it's particularly complicated. And then it's that often, my feeling is that often there is a confound between bilingualism and multiculturalism or biculturalism. So what I miss in the field is investigation with monolingual infants that, particularly when we go outside language, with infants that their two parents come from very different cultures, though they are fully monolinguals. Or another thing that I am missing in the language side is the bidialectal, the multidialectal infants. How much is all these effects that we are seeing, looking more at the mouth and all these things, is typical of bilingualism, or just being exposed to two dialects is enough? And many of our monolingual infants that we test are fully monolingual. They are multidialectal, many of them. And finally, just to make things even worse, I have a substantial part of my research have been with adults. So I'm always referring to the adult model. But if you are interested in simultaneous bilingualism, or in bilingualism that is learned in the first years of life, really in the first 2 years of life, you're not going to find data with adults, as the overwhelming majority of research with adults is with what I call sequential bilinguals, with bilinguals that they have learned the second language really after the first year of life, and I would even say after the second year of life. So I think that good luck and to anyone trying to investigate bilingualism, because it's an extremely difficult question. And what I would beg everybody is describe your population very, very, very well. Otherwise, we don't know what we are comparing with. And I think that often some apparent discrepancies between experiments may be due to differences in the populations. And we need this type of information to have the field advancing. And then I want to thank the people in my group. You have this a bit old picture, but not too old picture. And of course, all the participants. This is Ferranton's child, that now he's a teenager. But I like the picture. And of course, all the families that came to the lab, even during the coronavirus. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Núria, for this interesting and passionate talk.